Hello and welcome to the Ag Culture Podcast, where we cultivate tomorrow by inspiring agripreneurs and ag innovators through real-life perspectives in agriculture. I'm Paul Windemaller, your host on this journey of exploration and growth. On today's interview, I had the privilege of talking with Chris Grote, a connection that I made while I was in Brazil last month. He is the current chairman of Nuffield International. We met at the conference that we had for Nuffield in Brazil, and I really enjoyed hearing Chris's story. He's not new to farming. He's been in the industry in the UK, and he's farmed all around Europe for his whole career in several different countries. And he's going to be sharing that experience with us today on his interview that we did. And I found it really fascinating just seeing an opportunity that he took from his Nuffield journey back in, I believe it was 1990, right as the Soviet Union was collapsing and had fallen and the Iron Gate had crumbled. So he took a journey for 10 weeks into what was previously at that time the Soviet Union. And from that trip, with the connections that he made, built an amazing business in farming throughout Eastern Europe. So this is his story of how he did that and the lessons that he learned through it. Here's the interview with Chris Grote. Today, we have the opportunity to speak to UK farmer and really world farmer, Chris Grote, who I met in Brazil. What was that? A couple months ago, right? Chris, you are the chairman of Nuffield International, along with world traveler, farmer on how many continents?
Well, mainly Europe.
So, Chris, I really enjoyed hearing your story as we were waiting to go snorkeling in the river in Brazil. You gave me a pretty good rundown of your story, and you were a Nuffield scholar. Was it back in 1990?
Yes. Yeah.
1990. So, welcome to the show. I appreciate you being on here and sharing your story.
Okay.
Chris, why don't we start out? Why don't you give us a little background? How'd you start in agriculture, and then go from there and tell us what that looked like as you had kind of a turning point in your life, a second part of your life, starting with your Nuffield journey and during the fall of the Soviet Union.
Okay, I'll try and be reasonably brief. It's a bit of a story. I was born into a family who had been farming on both sides, and I'm afraid the genes spoke, and I wanted to do farming from as soon as I could walk. However, my father was one of 6 sons, and he didn't end up with a farm, so there was nothing to go to. And Germany in the 60s and 70s, of course, as West Germany was mainly small farms. Still, I left school at 15, started an apprenticeship in Germany over 2 years, learned a lot. I spent 1 year with the Federal Minister of Agriculture, who was my boss, which was very interesting, made me interested in politics. And then I was with a big seed grower who was a meticulous farmer, probably the best I've ever seen, even until this day. And then took my qualifications, and before I could go back to college and do higher education, agriculture, and sort of a degree equivalent, I had to do a year as a qualified apprentice. And the German Farmers Union in 1972 then sponsored me to go to France for 6 months, and immediately afterwards for 6 months to the UK. France was very different, very interesting. I didn't speak any French, but I learned some of it quite quickly. English, fortunately, I had at school, so that was a bit better. And I ended up in Norfolk, actually where I live now. UK agriculture was so different because I'd only just joined the EU in the January of 1970. 1973, and actually that was I came in January 73, so that was right at the beginning. Had a wonderful time, said I've got to come back to this. Went back to Germany for 2 years, did my qualification, then studied farm management at a UK college in 1975-6 for in agricultural management. And then worked for a very interesting company called Greens of Soham, still going today, producing vegetables for Marks and Spencer's, Sainsbury, and Waitrose at the time. Cut a long story short, that went on. I became a partner in the business, but in 1984, I then set off alongside on my own in Norfolk. Again, Norfolk being sort of northeast of London, with the North Sea at its most boundary, and took on the farm where I'd worked as a student a few years previous in partnership with the owner, and then went from there. Got some German family investors to buy a farm outside Norwich that expanded, and then later on in 1994 we ended up on the coast, right, literally on the edge of the North Sea, with 3 miles of beach on the farm. Again, an investment which I organised, and the deal basically was they sent the money, I looked after it in the UK, and in turn I had the tenancy for it. So that was 1994. So I'm going a little bit far ahead. In the sort of period of the late 80s and early 90s, I did alongside my farming, which is mainly arable, no livestock at that stage, and about 2,000 acres, something like that. I did quite a bit of consultancy work for a UK company called Produce Studies in places like Pakistan, Malaysia, the Middle East. I ended up in Israel and in Gaza for a while, so I have a bit of an idea what it's like in Gaza from those days, Syria, and then later on Bulgaria, and a lot of time in Russia, and also the Ukraine. Perhaps I come back to that. So that was a sort of if you like, the early period. And then I had applied for a Nuffield Farming Scholarship in 88, was awarded it, and was meant to travel in 89, but because of other commitments, I had to defer a year. So I actually started my scholarship about 6 months after the wall had come down, which for Europe, as you might imagine, in particular Germany, was a huge event. And suddenly you could travel, and I bought myself a VW camper, a bully, and set off on a 10,000-mile tour across Poland and what was then the Soviet Union, coming back via Hungary and the Czech Republic. And no Nuffield scholar had been there to any extent, so I was on my own. Never met another Nuffield scholar until I came back to speak at the conference.
Yeah, what was the attitude of the people that you met along that journey, coming through that experience of the Soviet Union kind of crumbling at that time? Was the reception good? Was it hard to learn as you went?
No, it was actually amazing, and particularly the Russians. The Russians, on the face of it, are sort of dour and sort of not very friendly. Actually, when you get to know them and you get to know the right people, you couldn't find nicer people and heartwarming and welcoming. To put it in a nutshell, I was 10 weeks on the road with my bully, and I think I slept in it 3 times. And I had the bully because I always had bed, but I was never allowed to use it because that was a sort of welcome. And the people you met, of course, you couldn't necessarily speak the same language, but somehow they got hold of somebody who spoke some English, and off we went. And it was just amazing. And immediately after scholarship, I then started doing some work out in those countries. And of course, that experience set me quite apart from most consultants who'd never been there, and of course didn't know the culture or anything. So that was a huge advantage.
What were the farms like at that point, as you were traveling around originally for that 10-week trip? When I was in Germany, East Germany, I saw a lot of the old collective style farm buildings that were still up. Was it like that in most of the areas that you went, or was it a lot of small holders? Or
no smallholders in Germany, in East Germany, because they were all collectivized. So they were all either cooperatives or combinats or state farms, as in combinats, and they would be anything up to 4,000 or 5,000 hectares. And then in Poland, there were smallholders or small farms, because the one country the communists never managed to collectivize entirely was Poland. But the sort of there was about 50% private farming, either co-ops or private farmers, and 50% state farms. And in Russia, again, everything was collectivized, or in Soviet Union at the time, with sort of, again, half and half split into state farms and kolkhozes and sovkhozes. Sovkhozes being a state farm, kolkhozes being a co-op farm. And not that actually they were very different. Some in a dreadful state, awful. And the same with the processing industry, etc. You could not believe it. The same in Germany, same in Poland, and some pretty good. Some actually quite good, and the best were in the Ukraine. And there were some fantastic enterprises now. They had a lot of old kit, but they were well organized. They had some decent yields, some good people managing it. Very, very big differences. So a big playground.
Yeah, a lot of opportunity was to be had out there if you could figure it out, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the first one, a German friend and I picked up, was in East Germany. That was as early as 1992, where we leased a state farm for 12 years, and that was mainly arable with a small dairy. We had to keep the dairy because of the regulations, but that was great fun. Did very well, and basically set the knowledge base for then Tomasz and my neighbor here in the UK and I to set up a business in Poland. And Tomasz was somebody I met, and he was at the CSC actually. He's now starting Poland, Nuffield. I met him on the first day of my scholarship in Poland, and we were great friends, and we set up this business together. And in June, we formed 1995. We formed a Polish company, and then started our first farm with 5,000 acres in Poland in January 1996.
When you went into your Nuffield journey, did you pick to go into the Soviet Union area because you saw, hey, there's going to be a lot of opportunity here, and go in with the mindset of, I'm going to come out of this with a good business plan to go over there and farm?
Not directly, but when I applied, part of our business previously in the UK had been packing vegetables, as I said earlier, for M&S and Sainsbury, people like that. And we'd sold that business, but I had quite a lot of experience in that. So when Gorbachev visited the UK and met Margaret Thatcher, and there's this famous piece where they both stand in front of number 10, and she says to the press, this is the man I can do business with. And so I thought, well, this is interesting. It was my German background and an interest in Berlin for various reasons. In particular, I thought, well, perhaps it's worth having a look to see whether Western agricultural management in particular could be of use in Eastern Europe. And well, I mean, talk about opportunity. It was just, fantastic.
And the first person you met along the way became a business partner.
Yes. Yeah. And that's been going on,
awesome.
well, since We've known each other since June 1990. First of all, we just sort of traveled together a bit, and I stayed in his parents' house and all that sort of thing. So that was great. But I then did some consultancy work in the UK for various reasons with Poland, and he helped me with that, and we paid him well for that. And then it was only 5 years later we actually hit on the idea of setting up a farm ourselves. And he was at the time an accountant, but having been a plant pathology lecturer at university originally, he didn't start working with us full time until 1999.
When you guys started out in Poland, what type of challenges, issues did you run into that you really didn't expect, kind of being on the new frontier there?
Well, just about everything. I mean, in sort of what we would call normal farming, I mean, the biggest problem we had on the first farm by far was couch grass. It was like a meadow, the whole 5,000 acres. And to give an impression of that, in 1996 we took on a harvest, which was a bit of winter cereals, etc., but never decided not to put in spring crops because we wanted to tidy up the land. And our total harvest of 5,000 acres was 600 tons of grains, wheat and barley.
Not really good cash flow, huh?
Oh yeah. It was all going out. We didn't have a lot. And then in 1997, so our second year, from the same land, we got to 6,000 tons of wheat and barley. Well, I've never done that again.
A 10x increase in yield?
Yeah, I can sort of pretty much say I've doubled it everywhere, certainly in Eastern Europe. But to do that was exceptional. But that was the state of the farm. So and we've been good customers of Monsanto.
Using a fair bit of Roundup, probably.
Yeah, and there's a great debate about what Roundup is and how much it's used, and there are all sorts of regulations coming in Europe and so on. And a lot of it I would subscribe to because it might well have its place, but God, it's made farming simpler. Certainly, if you've got a problem to start with. Once you've cleared it up, you don't really need it anymore. But to clear up, there's still argue there's nothing better. We couldn't have done what we've done without Roundup, no question about it.
That allowed you to really turn it around.
I call the last 45 years farming the Roundup age. It's made everything cheaper.
But it's made the land more productive, like you said. It allowed you to turn it around, and that probably built quite a bit of equity over time.
Yeah.
In your business.
Yeah.
So, what was your business model going into that? Was it we're just going to take on as much land as we can, rental wise? Was it we're going to buy all this land as much as we can and try and increase our equity position as it grows in value?
Well, the driver for us was renting land. So in Poland, which was our first country, we had to. There was only state farm leases.
Okay.
Because we didn't have any money, and that was certainly for the first 10 years our biggest problem: finding enough investors to finance what we wanted to do. Because on the original model, we set out we wanted to farm 100,000 acres within 5 years, because you couldn't manage the overheads from the UK with a sensible HQ, if you like, or with a sensible executive, which was partly Western, partly Central European, on a per hectare or per acre basis, because it would be too expensive. So we did need acres. And we got there. We were a bit under at 5 years, but we then got well above that later on.
And you were always sticking to the model of renting land rather than purchasing?
Yes.
in that business?
Yeah, we ended up with buying quite a bit of land from not in Poland, but from in the Czech Republic, which has got a different structure. A lot more co-ops and a lot more owners. We at some stage we had over 12,000 landlords in the Czech Republic on 27,000 hectares. So you can work out sort of 5 acres apiece. So
that sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, yeah. So we had in each region, and there were 3 in each region. We would have a land office, and they dealt with that. And in those days, obviously, the people came and wanted to sell their land because they'd inherited from granddad and needed money to build a garage or an extension at the house or something like that. And then, of course, we would buy it. And then we bundled it into a subsidiary where investors could invest in the land if they wanted to. And that was by parcel. And there were quite a few investors who did that as a sort of second leg. And then at some stage, a few years later, we then sold that on as a separate business. But by then it was about 2,000 hectares. And then sort of we repeated that model several times. So it was quite an unusual way of going about it, but we just didn't have the money. So
yeah, you're being scrappy and put a good plan together and execute it.
The interesting equation out of this is that those who have invested in land, obviously, give an example. I think in Romania, which was our latest exercise, I was buying land from our tenants for 800 to 1,000 euros initially. And you're talking post 2008, so that's 15, 16 years ago. And today that land would fetch 6,000 euros per hectare. So
6 to 8 times.
Yeah, but equally, as a tenant, we've made in that period equivalent money ourselves. So it's sort of, if you rented in the early days, not in Romania, that will be later on, but if you rented early and then compared with somebody who sold in 2010, say, then we made the same sort of money as they would have done, capital gain. Now now the capital gain would have outstripped it because it's just got crazy.
Yeah. And what's caused that? Is it hasn't really been the yield increase, has it? That's caused that land valuation spike there?
Well, East Germany is a good example, where initially, when the German land agency, which ended up owning a lot of land in East Germany, decided they wanted to sell some, to privatize it, so to speak, they held the land value much, much lower than it was in West Germany, because the ministry was worried that the lending to farmers in West Germany was so high that if the prices in East Germany got somewhere to equivalent, they would have had to pull the loans in. So it would have bankrupted a whole load of farmers in West Germany. So they basically released it very, very slowly, which was great for those who actually went in to buy. We did the same model. We just rented there, and then the family who owned the estate before the war actually bought it back because they came into some money. So we then did it with them, and we had a 12-year lease. And at the end of the 12-year lease, they then took over themselves. So that's an example. Poland was sort of pretty similar, but they're much longer leases.
Do you still see any opportunities like that today anywhere in the world? I know you get around, you were in Brazil with me, you get around Europe, other places around the world. Do you still see an opportunity to do what you did anywhere else?
I think the opportunities are never the same. And what we've done in Central Europe, I think that kind of thing is over. But there are similar opportunities, if you like, in terms of what one might or could do still around the world. And I would have thought South America would be one of them. There's still a lot going on, whether it's Argentina or Brazil or Paraguay, for example, Africa. But politics get in the way of quite a lot of that. I mean, I think the biggest thing in Europe was the politics. The immediate turning from all the Central European countries effectively overnight switching from Moscow to wanting to become EU members. And don't forget, none of them became EU members until 2004. So that was 15 years afterwards. So the accession period was quite long for the key ones. But that's what was happening. And strangely enough, what gave sort of banks and others the security that they got into NATO before then. So all the Baltic states.
Before that, 2004.
Yeah. Yeah. People like us thought at the time, well, what's NATO got to do with it? Why is this important? And we're writing 2024, and it's hugely important.
Yeah, it gave stability to the economies and the governments there, that they weren't going to be overthrown again, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So looking back on your experience and what you did in Eastern Europe, do you feel like you just timed it well? You just got lucky there? Or did you really think through, hey, this is an opportunity of my lifetime. I really need to take advantage of this. What was that thought process?
Well, I let's put it like this. I did my 10 weeks coming back to Nuffield, and there's no question that was life-changing. And I knew it would be life-changing on my journey back. And you could put it in one simple sentence, and that's I can't leave this. So I've got to do something. And as soon as I got home, I got a couple of phone calls. Can you have a look at so-and-so? And this was in East Germany. So after 10 weeks with my wife and two babies at home, I was 3 weeks at home in the middle of harvest on my own farm. And then I was off again. And every week I was in East Germany until just before Christmas. so it was kind of crazy. But the knowledge I sort of acquired through that, and then the early 90s in all the Central European countries was just immense to help when we set up a business. And yet we nearly bankrupted ourselves in 2001. And in hindsight, we couldn't afford it at the time. We were thinking about it. What we really needed was a professional finance director who knew his way around the city and could raise money for us. And any institutional investor who got interested at the beginning, or indeed any other investor, they were always asking for the model with an exit. And the agriculture were in such a state that you could not, in your right mind, propose an exit in 5 or 6 years' time and run the figures accordingly. And the sort of IRRs that were sort of in the second half of the 90s that were being demanded by financial institutions and investors, they were obscene for agriculture. We could never, you could make up numbers, but you could get nowhere near that sort of thing. So we got nothing, or very, very slow. And of course, the UK banks, they wouldn't lend anything abroad, never mind the securities. Even if the securities were based on estates or land in the UK, they still wouldn't give us any money to take over there.
So, you said you really needed a finance director at that time. Who else was on your team at that time? What did your team look like?
Well, we had Tomasz, who had obviously financial background, but from accounting point of view. So he was extremely clever with how we financed Poland. We had a very good partner in the Czech Republic, because the Czech Republic we started the year after Poland, because our view was at the time, pre-EU, pre-all that, we felt that we needed to have a foot in two countries just from the risk point of view. And the Czech Republic's agriculture was quite different to Poland. So we found a partner there who was very good and financially very astute with his own business. But that was with our business in the Czech Republic, not with the group, if you like. So that was my partner, Charles Cater, who was a trained land agent, and myself. That was basically it. And initially, the management, the actual farm management, the expat management, which we needed initially, came from one of the UK farm management companies. And we then, later on, we then did it ourselves. But when we sold the business to a fund in 2016, so that was exactly 20 years later, 2015, exactly 20 years later, we had about 1,650 employees, and in the group, which involved a UK business as well. So it was UK, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Romania. And they were only two expats, and one had been living in Poland since 1991, had a Polish wife and kids, and the other one is a Scotsman who came out with us in 2000, who's got a Czech wife and Czech family, and that's it. There are no others. They're all local. So our aim always was to build a local business with some outside interests, but not to produce Little England, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, you think that would have been much harder to do that if everyone came out of England? You don't think you would have had the buy-in locally that you would have needed to make a successful business?
Yeah, we needed a number of people to sort of crank up some things because they just didn't have the knowledge. But that was basically training, and we actually set up, which I ran myself at the later stages, a training academy. So we were training our own managers and our own apprentices, and then our own directors as well. So that was very interesting, very satisfying to see somebody 5 years after they've done it running 10,000 hectares.
Yeah, that's a pretty incredible achievement to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Going from very little knowledge to being able to run a business that size.
Yeah, that was UK, if you like, not UK based, but it was so training came out of UK, quite a lot of it. So our postgraduate course, for example, we had two, which ran for 8 years. We had two from each country every year, and the common language was English. So they improved their English through that for a start, and so there was cross fertilization on every session, which is good. And of course, no Zooms, etc. So it wasn't very cheap. We had to fly them all into UK or to somewhere else, and so find a hotel where we could have a session for a week or so with some visits. But very worthwhile.
What's the difference in your mind between those operators that you trained like that and somebody that's an owner of the business themselves, owner operator of the business? Do you think that would have even been possible to have something like that with that old Soviet mindset at that point in time, or not really?
Well, you can always buy people. Finding out where they are and whether it works is quite difficult. When you've got a group like this, so you can give your own people experience elsewhere, by a Pole seconded to Romania or Romanian seconded to the UK, you've got a much better learning curve, and it goes a little bit like this: you make an investment in training, and you invest in a couple of postgraduates, and it's quite expensive. So they have 2 years of training alongside their job. And after 5 years, on average, you're left with one. So actually the cost of a senior manager, or what is then perhaps a junior director in a business, or director, and have done really well, has cost you 2 postgraduate investments. And the way I used to justify this was very simple at the boardroom, was I said, okay, we make an investment in ourselves and we get a return of 50%, but the other 50% is our contribution to our industry. It's been fascinating to see where the other 50% have ended up, which businesses, some have actually come back, yeah, but they run some very serious businesses today.
Yeah, because they didn't lose that knowledge. It just went somewhere else, right?
Yeah, of course. And that's what you get. And of course, people got to know that, we were spending a lot on this, or quite a bit on this, and therefore we had some very good people. So they came, they came and offered double the money. Well, what do you do if you're a young chap? And of course, if we'd done that, of course you can't do that, because then you've got to do it with everybody else, in fairness. So there you are. So you have to, they just go.
Right. You just have to consider that cost into what you're doing.
Yeah. So it doesn't happen that often, but it does happen, obviously.
Yep.
But as I say, that's a contribution to the industry, and we all have to make a contribution to the industry.
Yeah, and you're doing that still today with your chairmanship role of Nuffield International. What has that played after you got back, after you started your business? What role has that played in your career?
Well, I became a trustee of Nuffield, I can't remember what, 2011, 11-12. And that was really because I wanted some of our management to be able to do Nuffield Scholarship. And was quite upset that that wasn't possible because they weren't UK resident. It was a UK business, but of course our managers weren't UK residents, so they couldn't apply it. So I got a bit more interested. So I ended up becoming a trustee, having done absolutely nothing for the previous 50 years because we were building the business. We had other things to do.
Yeah.
And then sort of one thing led to another. Then we sold the business, which had basically, that was the business investment. My time and expenses on Nuffield were an investment by the business. Then when that ceased, when we sold the business, then I basically did that in my own time, and now I'm doing it because I'm retired. So that's the sort of thing. It's my contribution to charity, if you like.
Well, that's great, and I definitely appreciate you doing that. That's it's had an impact on me so far, early on in my Nuffield journey here. 3-4 months into it. So, what it looked like when you exited, if you don't mind talking about that, when you exited the business that you had built over the 20 years, what was the reason for exiting at that time that you did, and what did that look like?
Well, we had a fund who bought a minority stake in 2008, which was so I think it started in 2007, which was sort of the first time when the grain prices had gone through the roof, and since we'd started. And the world was very keen in setting up large enterprises in agriculture. We thought, well, there was a good opportunity, and they were courting us, etc., etc. So they paid quite a lot of money to become a shareholder, and they were good investors for us, I have to say. It allowed us to go out and acquire more farms. We then had a pretty profitable streak for a while, then it sort of dipped a bit. And then, as these funds do, they have to reinvest after a number of years. So they needed to get out. And at that stage, the alternatives were buying back the shares, which you just about could have done, but that would have basically stifled our plans, if you like. The other alternative was to do an IPO, a small IPO, but the UK and London is not a very good place for agriculture. And the third one was selling it, and there was another fund who was very interested and been courting us for a while. So we made a deal with us, and that allowed all the shareholders but they insisted to buy us out completely, and that allowed all the shareholders to get their money back plus, which was very satisfying, and that was a good sale. No question about it. Certainly not in hindsight.
But that kind of redirected your career from that point on, right?
Yes. Yeah. Pretty much. Yeah. Well, that's how these things go. I mean, that would have been quite nice if one had enough money and a bigger shareholding. I mean, we got diluted to nothing effectively over this process over the 20 years. But then I have to admit that I was the original founder of the company. I bought a company off the shelf, which I quite liked the name of, and had a few tax losses. I bought it for £150. It was worth a lot more later on.
I'm sure. I'd hope so. I'm sure there's a lot of other struggles along the way that you haven't mentioned that you had to go through and deal with. What are some of the other interesting stories?
Well, financially, 9/11, which might be a bit surprising, but this was in the autumn, and basically, particularly in Poland, we had revolving working capital loans, which basically you pay them off from harvest, and then you reorganize them, and it's basically just a paper exercise from one day to the next. But this happened, we just paid it all back, and we'd actually had much more headroom the following year, organized and signed up. And after 9/11, the banks all clamped up in Central Europe. Not so much in the UK, but in Poland, for example, that was it. Nothing. So, and 2001 was an extremely difficult farming year. So we had to scramble. Got hold of all our shareholders, tried to find some new ones, and sold what we could sell, and so on. And just managed to scrape through.
And live to fight another day.
Yeah, and once that got vaguely sorted, of course the banks were back. But you wouldn't like to know about the 12 months from 9/11. and of course, and I happened to be in the yard of a brand new potato store which we just built, and it rained so much. We hadn't started potato harvest in Poland, had to start early, end of August. And we hadn't harvested a single acre because it was so wet. And I was thinking, this is going to be a tough season, etc., etc. And one of my colleagues rang me up and said, you better find yourself a television. And he was explaining that this airplane had gone into the World Center in New York, where I'd been on the top floor the year before, exactly to the day. And
oh, wow.
As we talk, he says, oh my God, the second one's got a hit. And he just said, this will change everything. And I thought, what's he talking about? Yeah, we're in agriculture. We're in Poland. Why should that? And goodness me, of course it did. So that's how outside influences can have their effect.
Yeah. Is there a way, looking back on that now, that you could have potentially put yourself in a better position to deal with that?
Because we had just made a deal which basically led to, if you like, the near financial disaster, which turned out the best deal we've ever done. And if we had not done that, a whole load of other things would fall into place, like the funds that did investing, and the sale wouldn't have gone anything like it because this was the central piece missing.
So through that really difficult challenge, you actually ended up better because of it, because it made you have to scramble and created opportunities that you weren't even looking at before.
Yeah. I mean, and at the time, in the end of the day, it was just bad luck, and you just got to work through it. Yep. And I don't think fundamentally we might have made some small wrong decisions at the time, but as far as the strategy is concerned, or the major management decisions, no. I mean, to give you an example, when we had obviously we had some sort of emergency meetings, and one of the meetings was debated whether we should sell our dairy units, cash in on livestock, which we'd done in a number of Czech farms, because the facilities were so poor that we couldn't see how to regenerate them, so we thought we better give up the livestock. And of course, that's instant cash flow. And but we're running about 5,000 cows, something like that. But then this was 2002. But we knew that the day Poland was getting into the EU in 2004, we would be getting 30 million liters of milk quota for free,
which had a lot of value.
Precisely. So we sort of looked at it and said, no, we can't do this. And we didn't, but costly. But then, of course, we got our milk quota.
Yeah, and that put a whole bunch of equity in your balance sheet instantly.
Yeah, and I mean, to give you an idea, the average milk yield when we took on the herds in Poland, and you're talking what sort of 1998, 99, and 2001, there's two setups, and you would be looking at 3,500 to 4,000 liters a cow per annum, and they're now at 11. And we bred them up with the animals which were there. We didn't buy any because couldn't afford them, so we just did it through semen. But we also have a semen trading business in Poland as a subsidiary as a consequence of that.
Okay. Now, did you do a lot of that vertical type integration with tag on companies like the semen company in your businesses as you went around to the different countries?
Yeah, potato seed. Then we got some sort of big contracts with manufacturers, big food manufacturers. And then on the seed side, generally, we've still got a seed trading business. We grow a lot of seed wheat, seed barley, and so on. We had a freezing business at one stage. So we're doing peas and beans and sweet corn, that sort of thing. That was probably not a wise investment because that is such a, how shall I put it? Even with 50,000 tons of frozen product, you're a minnow, and you're up against the Unilevers of this world and Green Core and whatever they're called. And so we're nothing. And of course, really, farmers are not good traders. So we didn't have the skills. And we certainly didn't have the processing skills. We were pretty good, but it didn't. That was the wrong. They were the wrong products.
Do you think that's still the right strategy to look at opportunities to vertically integrate or tag on supply businesses that integrate into your farming business, or you think really just focus on the core of your business of farming is the right strategy if you were to do it again?
I would argue certainly here in Europe, it may be some and some. Yeah, we went too far in some ways and got it about right in others. It's another little venture which is very small, but it works very well. And that's we've got one farm in Poland which produces quite a lot of top fruit. And for one reason or another, we persevered with it. But today, most of the sales go through little kiosks we have in several places at particular junctions where we happen to have a bit of land, and we put up a container and we juice our own apples, but sell them also fresh. And that's got I forget now what the trade name is, but that's been going very well. It's very profitable. So yes, that goes directly to the retailer, to the end consumer.
To the consumer, yeah.
Yeah, but it's nothing in terms of the whole business.
Is there anything else that of your story that you think would be beneficial to hear?
You could perhaps sum it up. Don't be afraid of having a go if you're convinced about it. I think at some stage I must have had quite skill in persuading other people to go along with us.
That was your superpower?
Well, no, in hindsight, I would say, by God, was I naive. But in hindsight, it's also very satisfying that we delivered, and we delivered well. We delivered beyond certainly any shareholder's expectations by a long way. We went 20 years after a shareholder put some money in, turns around and said, well, actually, I wrote it off after 3 months because I thought it'll never come to anything. And he was a small shareholder, and he put it into his sort of pension fund, and another one said sort of similar, the same thing. Oh, I can buy a flat in London for my daughter now. That goes down well.
Yeah, no, you built an incredible business and have.
That I should have been able to hold on to more of my shares.
You think that's the big takeaway?
The big takeaway is twofold. One, if you've got nothing and you still do it, of course you get the highest return if it comes out right. But when you're in trouble and you've got to let people in, and they do it entirely on trust, but you have to drop the share price to nothing because you're so desperate for getting funds in. I mean, they made a fortune in 10 years.
Mm.
And good luck to them. Yeah, because without them, you wouldn't have survived. They got an enormous amount of return for having, and dividends on top, for basically just having lent some money. Or no, not lent money, but put equity in. So timing. You get the timing right, the bucks are big.
Yeah, and that's really at the end of the day, it's you have to do your best and work hard and be smart, but a lot of it does boil down to timing, doesn't it?
But the other thing is you've got to have the right team, and whether you call it luck or skill, we managed to find exceptional, trustworthy people, because if you go into a foreign country, that's what you got to have, because you don't speak the language. And if you can't trust, and this is, I had that relationship with Tomasz in Poland, and then managed it with one or two others. But you along the way, you have a lot more experience on who to find and who to trust.
Yeah, and you gain that as you go, right?
Yeah, and then you've got to delegate. You've got to trust them that when you're away, that it still all happens, which a lot of people can't do that. I learned that very early in my life through something else. But and sometimes you have a bad apple, but believe in the good and trust people first and foremost. You have to swallow your pride and get on with it if it doesn't work. But if you don't have that attitude, you get shafted.
Yeah, you can't do all that. You can't build a business like that all by yourself with not trusting anyone to come along with you.
And also, you don't have a life if you don't do that, because you're worrying all the time.
Right.
You share the good times and you share the bad times, and then that your team is as deep in the boat as you are, then it's all right.
Yep.
But the other side of it, when we had an exceptional year, we gave everybody who had a contract, a work contract with us, an employment contract with us, we gave everybody, I think it was 2 or 3 months shares as a bonus off that year, and we paid for those shares, obviously. So every single employee across 5 countries had shares in the business in the end. So they all got a payout.
So they got to reap the rewards.
Yeah.
Yep.
And okay, for the individual, and you on my terms, it might not have been very much, but it's a different kind of thank you than if you just get sold and you've got nothing to do with it, and you had nothing to do with it. But the attitude in the business was amazing. They sort of much more with you because they have access to you might think a tractor driver doesn't look at the annual accounts. I can tell you they do.
Well, yeah. Number one, it means, do I have a job next year? Number two is if they've got some ownership in it, they're going to be a lot more interested in how it performs.
Yeah. Well, the flip side of that, of course, is you can't do that if you haven't made money to do it. The business has to be safe. It'd be wrong to ask people to participate when you're in trouble.
Well, Chris, I really appreciate you coming on today to the Ag Culture Podcast, and I loved hearing your story when we first talked about it in Brazil, and loved hearing it again today. And thank you for sharing your nuggets of wisdom that you've gained over a year-long career of farming and all over around Europe. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for tuning into this episode of Ag Culture Podcast. The interview that I had with Chris Grote was something that I got a lot of nuggets out of. A couple of the big takeaways for me were really the importance of timing an opportunity. He took advantage of an opportunity he saw as the Iron Curtain in Eastern Europe was falling, and really took advantage of that and built a big business because of that. Also, his perspective on the challenges that he faced in his business when he struggled, that he turned those challenges into opportunities, and it actually made his business better in the end. And lastly, I just got a good perspective, a historic perspective of what was going on during that era in the early 1990s as Eastern Europe was trying to find itself, and each individual country was trying to build its own government back up after the fall of the Soviet Union, and what that looked like in agriculture. So once again, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And as always, please like and subscribe to our podcast on whatever channel you listen to it on. And check out our social media posts. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, as well as I believe there's a couple other social media platforms that we're on, but those are our main ones that we're active on. So check out some of the things that I did while I was on my travels. Check out the upcoming travel that I'll have. And until next week, I'm Paul Windemaller, and this has been the Ag Culture Podcast.